Bully and Tommy agreed that I think they both said that NXT won tonight. I definitely agree that NXT won tonight. I'll be honest. And when we used to have this discussions, back in the day when it came to AEW and NXT head to head, I think NXT won with the wrestling. I was more invested in the matches on NXT by far than I was with AEW. And AEW, it was called Title Tuesday, but I thought you got more of the title matches on NXT than you did with AEW. So I really do believe, top to bottom, that NXT won the night. And, we started the show talking about that each show had 1,800 people. But I really do feel when you're in a smaller venue and that crowd is hot, I don't think you care about the size of the venue. That crowd brought it on NXT last night. So I definitely give the edge to NXT overall from last night.
Maximum capacity at the Elks Lodge in Queens, New York was 850 people. We squeezed in 1,200. But when you saw that Elks Lodge on TV and you saw how rabid that fan base was and the product you were getting in the middle of the ring, you sat home and you go, I want to be there. I want to be a part of that. I can't tell you how many people I hear from out there on the old Twitter machine who say, man, I wish I could have been at the Elks Lodge back in the day. The arena was a different story. The arena, as cool as the arena was, there was something very, very special about that Elks Lodge and the perception that it had on television.
I get it for sure because the perception on TV. And a sellout is a sellout. All right. The venue only holds 1,800, but it's still a sellout. There was somebody that went to that box office to buy a ticket and couldn't buy it and got turned away. And they're going to make sure that the next time NXT is in town, that they get their ticket early so they're not shut out. Unfortunately, with AEW right now, you could say, you know what? I could wait until 5 minutes before the show and I'll be able to buy a ticket. Perception is reality in that case. Let's go out to Johnny in San Antonio. What's going on, Johnny? All right, Johnny, really good call. First and foremost, as far as competing with Raw and SmackDown, that's never going to happen. You got to remember, and you got to put things in perspective. NXT is still the developmental brand for WWE. We talked to Shawn Michaels a couple weeks ago, and he said that he has to focus on that balance. He has to put on a weekly live show that people are going to want to watch, but also he has to be focused on having these performers grow and get them ready for the main roster. Because if any of those wrestlers on the brand are truly successful, they're going to move to the main roster one day. So boy, I think you have to throw out the window of ever competing with Raw or SmackDown. By the way, I'm fine. I don't think NXT has to be a Raw or SmackDown when it comes to production. I kind of like a little bit more of a Raw type of product when it comes to NXT, almost like the Saturday Night Live of wrestling, not ready for primetime players, knowing that, hey, they're not quite there yet, but they're almost there. That makes me want to watch the NXT product a little bit more, that these are the stars of the future.
Dave, also, I mean, a lot of this, and for the nation, if you understand, it's budgeting, right? We heard how much AEW received. We know that CW gave NXT $25 million for their programming. That's for 2 hours a week. If you take things on tour, a lot of these buildings are union buildings. You also got to understand setup. Setup is not a one-day thing when you're bringing TV. That's 2 days of setup where everything is an added cost. Just because your roster doesn't equal that much money, but buildings, and if you're going to be a touring company, there's no way you're going to be making up that money with tickets. So these are just things. In PC, they have everything in-house. Me personally, I look at it and I go, we should tour. Dave, you and I had talked about it once a month to make it special, to continue to draw and grow our audience, and then do like a 2-week taping. because you also got to remember when you have everything in-house like they do at that PC was built up by the WWE, and all that stuff is WWE owned. So you got to look at it kind of like that way too.
I mean, listen, and I know it was a different era, but my favorite territory was world class. Every single TV taping was at the Sportatorium. And how many fans did the Sportatorium hold, Tommy? Like,
Not a lot.
1,000? Yeah, not a lot.
Probably like maybe 15 tops.
That's it. And
what
then
did they used to do? Go to do special shows at where? Reunion Arena.
Reunion Arena. And then, with the WWF for years and years, Hamburg Fieldhouse in Pennsylvania that just hold about 1,500 people tops in that building. I don't even think that much at the Hamburg Fieldhouse. Like, I grew up watching, wrestling on WTBS at the TBS studios in front of 50 people. And that was maybe at that time the most watched pro wrestling show that there was. I know it's a different era, but also this is the developmental. So I think you're right. I think, you know what? People are going to be fine watching the wrestling from the PC, and then every once in a while having a major show in an arena like we've seen the last 2 weeks on the CW. I think fans will be okay with that.
There's a reason.
People,
there's a reason Raw used to be where? The
Manhattan Center.
Yeah. Then they would go to Lowell. They would also tape 2 shows for, that night back to back sometimes. Why? It went to costs. And what Jericho said too, back in the day, they were not receiving that money. Now that they are going to, they're going to bigger venues now. Why? Because of the money they're receiving. They're literally receiving $1 billion from Netflix. So they can afford to go to these big ass venues as long as they continue to draw.
You also have to take into account the perception of the wrestling fan these days when it comes to NXT or AEW. The wrestling fan is used to seeing NXT in a smaller venue, such as the PC. So when you see them in a smaller venue, like they were at the Factory last night in St. Louis, it's not abrupt. It's not that big of a change, but AEW has always been in bigger arenas. And those big arenas were filled to capacity. Now, when you see the numbers dwindling and you see 1,800 people in the big arena, the perception is different. When you see AEW take their show out of the big arena and put it into the smaller arena for Collision and Rampage, different perception. The perception is the company is taking step backwards. I could sit here and I can tell you why moving to the small arena is a good idea. I can give you all the positives of it. That's not going to change people's perception of, wow, they're just not the cool ticket in town.
Yeah, I understand where you're coming from, Bully, but I think it's easy to change that perception. Case in point, you just said AEW Collision. When Collision first started, I saw one of the first episodes in Newark, New Jersey. There was 8,000 people at Collision. Then, they just did a string of shows over the summer where they did it in a venue that only fit, I think, 800 or 900 people. I got to tell you, I really enjoyed those shows in San Antonio for Collision. Even though it was a smaller venue, the way they lit it, the way they filmed it, because the crowd was tighter and smaller in a smaller venue, they were much louder. I actually enjoyed Collision more than I did Dynamite for that reason. I understand the public perception, Bully, but I think you would take a hit initially. You would take a hit, like people would be like, they're taking a step backwards. But I think over time, and it wouldn't be that much time, I think the perception would change. And then if, like you say, the ebbs and flows of wrestlings, if they start to hit a high again, where they could start booking larger venues, then people would be like, oh shit, they're booking larger venues again.
And there's no shame in going into the smaller venue, because a wrestling company's business will be up and down at times. We've talked about it. It's how you get through the valley and work your way back up. if the bottom fell out tomorrow on the WWE and they no longer had fans coming to the arenas all over the country, all over the world, do you know what the WWE would do? Do you know what the WWE's safety net could always be?
What's that?
The Manhattan Center. We could always go back to that 1,100 seat venue where it all started and still film television there. We can build from the ground up once again, because that's where we built from day one. You always have that. And I believe that AEW right now should start looking at their product in a rebuilding way. Tommy talked earlier about Don Callis, Will Ospreay, and Kyle Fletcher last night. I also believe that was the best segment of the show. I believe that segment should be a giant wake-up call to Tony. None of the wrestling last night, I'm going to say it didn't matter, because I'm sure AEW fans like the wrestling matches that they got, but nothing was as important last night on the show as Ospreay and Don Callis. And they did a good job with the drama they created. I think they could have done an even better job if they had somebody producing them who could have milked that segment a lot more. That segment was really, really good. It could have been great. However, I think it should be very eye-opening to them. There's only a small portion of fans in the big picture who really give about 5-star matches. Last night was a 5-star in-ring with Don Callis and Ospreay. You start concentrating on stuff like that. You start telling stories like that, developing characters like that. Callis hated, Ospreay loved. Callis, the smack. Ooh, oh my God, I can't believe he did that. The facials on Ospreay turning around, the handing of the screwdriver. Those are the moments that you take and you milk and you let the people emotionally invest in. Because if they're emotionally invested, they're emotionally invested in you. Matches come and go. They're moves. They're just moves. You can't emotionally invest in a move.
And Bully, this is no disrespect, but to your point, and the best example for me from last night would be Hologram and Commander. Like, that was what you would call the typical AEW spot fest match. That was a crowd-pleasing match for the people in attendance, but it's empty calories. Again, it's like, are you going to remember Hologram and Commander after it comes out of my mouth right now? You're not. Now,
what's the example you always give about Coke and Twinkies or something like that?
It's like drinking a Coke and eating a Twinkie. Like, it tastes good while you're doing it, but if you do it too much, you're going to get sick, and it's completely empty calories. Has no nutritional value at all, but it tastes good while you're doing it, and I think that's the same thing with Hologram and Commander. Okay, that was a fun match, but that's where it ends. If you put on matches like that every week, then people aren't going to pay for a ticket to see your show, and they're not going to tune in, because then it's the same empty calories week in and week out. However, to your point, if you're giving a story like you saw with Don Callis and Will Ospreay, man, I got to watch next week, because how is Will Ospreay going to respond? How is Don Callis going to respond? And if you build up to a match, then people are going to want to buy a ticket to see that match.
I gotta watch next week. And what genre of television shows makes you watch every single day?
Soap operas and episodic TV.
How long has Guiding Light and General Hospital and The Young and the Restless and As the World Turns, these soap operas were on TV for 30, 40, 50 years. I think The Young and the Restless is still on TV, excuse me. They go out there and they tell stories every single day. and have to keep you hooked. It's not about high spots. It's about stories. My point is, there's nothing wrong with Commander versus Hologram. There's a spot for that match on every AEW show, but that's got to be the exception and not the rule. Eventually, I'm hoping that Tony Khan, the light bulb goes off for him, because we all need the light bulb to go off for us in the wrestling business. Tommy had his moment when the light bulb went off. I had my light bulb moment. It's where when all of these veterans who try to teach you and try to educate you and try to smarten you up for your own good, when you're going, no, you think you know better, I know better. And then all of a sudden the light bulb goes off and you're like, holy, they were right. Tony eventually has to have that moment. Hopefully he has that moment where he goes, all right, I love my 5-star matches. I love my "this is awesome" chants. But how about they start chanting "this is awesome" for a segment like Don Callis and Will Ospreay? Then you got him. That's when you know you got him. And how do I know? Because I've been in the middle of in the ring for enough of those segments where I knew I had them and a word hadn't been spoken yet. If you get me and Tommy in the ring, we can create such tension with one another and not even say a word. That's when you have them. You have them emotionally invested. I know I preach on this show about the word emotion and caring. Responding to a wrestling move is not caring and no emotional investment towards a character. How many people throw super kicks? Everybody and their mother. But when Shawn Michaels throws a super kick, it means something because you care about Shawn Michaels.
And the same thing could be said about a word. And words where people care, they're emotionally invested. They hate Don Callis so much they don't want to hear his words. When Don finally said, "Yes, I did," there was a bit of a gasp. And it's different, right? Every person, if you think about it, the show opened up with a talking segment, but then that talking segment kind of went all over the place. And then the Daniel Garcia announcement, which the people got behind. And what did that segment end with? An AEW chant. And I watched that guy and I'm like, this is somebody I still could build around. He has this type of connection. Same with what Jericho said about Briscoe. But it's the person, it's the character, and it's the thing. The one thing that I would have wished they would have said, I wish he would have said, my contract is expiring. And and I know there's a lot of rumors that I might leave. And I got to be honest, and that's the one time I wanted internet rumors to be addressed, because to be honest, I did not know what he was there to talk about. Am I retiring because I'm hurt? Or am I this? There are two different things of that presentation and then I would also tell him, hey, by the way, to what Bully pointed out before, half of your promo towards the end when you were that excited, you turned your back on the camera. And you were just talking to the people, which I get, which you have to come back and open up to that camera, because main players are the people watching at home that want to know about it, as opposed to when you turn your back to those people and then you're addressing everybody.
That was the same thing with Luchasaurus. I did not know that Luchasaurus was having some health issues and was in the hospital. And I asked Paul before our show, I said, what's going on with Luchasaurus? And he said he had some health issues. He was in the hospital. I didn't know about that. I didn't see that on social media. I didn't see that on the internet. But Christian alluded to it when he had the face-to-face with Hook. But if you don't address it and you don't talk about it, how is the viewer supposed to know about that if it's not being addressed. Same thing with Daniel Garcia. That's all internet rumor. That was all internet rumors. Unless you make it part of the storyline, your fans aren't going to know.
Dave, Daniel Garcia did a good job last night. And as Tommy said, yes, they ended with an AEW chant. But man, did they miss a huge opportunity with Daniel Garcia. If I'm Daniel Garcia, I'm walking out to that ring with a manila envelope. And I'm telling the people that what I hold in my hand is a contract for my future, a contract for my wrestling future and the future of my family and my life. And I start to talk about the contract that I had in my hand. And then I would tell the people, this is not an AEW contract. This is a contract from another wrestling company. And I think you all know what wrestling company this contract is from. And I got to be honest, people, this is a very lucrative contract. And the numbers on this contract are almost double than what was offered to me by Tony Khan and AEW. And I got to worry about Daniel Garcia. And I got to worry about my family. And I got to worry about this and one thing. And this is a very, very difficult decision because you've all been so good to me here at AEW. Blah, 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 blah. I would reel the people all the way in to the point where they're like, no, Daniel, no, you're not going to leave us. You're not going to sell out to this other company. And then he rips the contract up. This contract, that other company, blah, blah, blah. AEW is where I started. AEW is where the best wrestle. AEW is where I want to be. AEW is I'm getting goosebumps, and this is coming off the top of my head because this is so easy. And then Daniel Garcia says, I'm staying with AEW. Dave, what do you think of that idea?
I love it. I love it. And you weren't the only one getting goosebumps. You could even have a tear in Daniel Garcia's eye where show the emotion on the fans' faces where they think, oh my God, Daniel Garcia is leaving. Everybody's got their head in their hands. As soon as he rips up that envelope, the place would explode. And then, like Tommy said, those AEW chants, 10 times louder than you heard last night.
At that very moment, after he rips up the contract, you could have had Tony Khan come out. Tony Khan hands him a brand new AEW contract, hands him a pen. Tony turns around. Daniel Garcia puts the contract on Tony Khan's back, signs his new AEW contract. They hug, hands in the air, massive AEW chant. You go off to commercial.
Bully, it's perfect because the way they did it last night, two things. Either because they didn't address it and they didn't make it part of a storyline, you're just basing it off the internet and social media. Half your audience doesn't know what you're talking about. And then the other half that does already is saying, all right, Daniel Garcia is going to address his future. Oh, I wonder what Daniel Garcia is going to say. I mean, of course he's going to stay with AEW. Why would they tease something if he was going to go and he was going to leave? So I agree with you. I think they completely dropped the ball with that last night.